Hey guys, welcome to week 11 notes and lecture. This is our first week in our forensics unit, and there is a lot of notes for this week. Some of it you can just listen and you'll see the ear. Just as a reminder, I would like you to handwrite these notes into your 5-subject notebook, and you can take pictures of them and send them to me to get your daily grade, to get a 100 for your daily grade. And of course, I'm probably going to talk faster than you can write, so you should just pause the video to copy and then just hit play when you're ready to continue. You don't need to do all of this in one day. Like I said, there's a lot of notes, and it's really important that you absorb the information, remember it, retain it, comprehend it. And so really you have the 5 days to get this done. So don't feel like, you can certainly do it in less than 5, but I don't want you to feel like you have to do it all in one sitting. So let's get started. Let's see. Let me just make sure that's the right slide. Yep. Okay. So your heading for week 11 is evidence and forensics. Oh. So there's a lot of different types of evidence, and you can just kind of follow my mouse here. We have direct evidence, and that is firsthand observations, eyewitness accounts, dashboard video camera, confessions. Those are some examples of direct evidence. And then we have physical evidence, which of course is what we think of when we hear forensics and crime scene processing. Latent impressions, fibers, weapons, bullets, shell casings. These are all some examples of physical evidence. And it's important because it can reduce the number of suspects, to who you're looking at. Then you have circumstantial evidence, which is indirect. And we'll talk a lot more about that in class when we talk about some cases. A lot of people have the impression, wrongly so, that circumstantial evidence is not good evidence. It absolutely is good evidence. It's just a different kind. And you can convict people on nothing but circumstantial evidence. So what is it? It may link a suspect to the crime or the crime scene, but there isn't any direct link. For example, the suspect's gun was found at the crime scene. Okay, and I'm not saying that by itself is enough to arrest somebody or convict somebody, but it's indirect, it's circumstantial, it's their gun. How did their gun get to the crime scene if they weren't the ones who did the crime? Well, there are other ways. So it's evidence, it's important evidence, but it's circumstantial, it's not direct. And then, there's biological evidence, which is physical evidence, honestly. And we'll talk all about that stuff, in our forensics unit. Again, we can narrow down the pool of suspects to a group or even a single individual, based on bodily fluids, hair, perhaps plant material, plant parts, natural fibers, etc. Those are just some examples. And so just to give you some definitions, crime scene forensics, the word forensics actually means belonging to courts of justice. So it's about testifying in court about the value of physical evidence found. And that's from the Black's Law Dictionary. And forensic evidence, that which tends to prove or disprove any matter in question, also from Black's Law Dictionary. Okay, so you have an ear. Telling the story, forensics, the ability through physical evidence and modern technology to speak for someone who cannot speak or will not speak. Because, and there's a lot of reasons, but here's just a few, the victim is deceased, The victim is frightened, withdrawn, intimidated. Maybe the victim is a child, or the defendant invokes their Fifth Amendment. So we speak for them. And who's involved in forensics? Well, certainly police officers, firefighters, EMTs, medical examiner and or the coroner, the district attorney, investigators, detectives, laboratory personnel, specialists like entomologists, cause and origin team, forensic anthropologists, fingerprint examiners, question document examiners, blood spatter experts. These are all areas that we're going to get into in this unit. And I certainly don't expect that you know what all of these are, but this is all part of forensics and crime scene processing. So really you can divide it into two categories. The first category is field work, actually processing the crime scene. So crime scene processing in the field, as I mentioned to you guys in class, usually is a police officer. Certainly here in New York State, that is the case. And in most other states, that's the case. But there are some, and I named some of them, that actually do hire civilian, regular people to do this work. Of course, you have to be trained. You have to go to school and learn how to do this. But it is possible if you really, really, really want to do this work. But you do not want to be a police officer. You can go to, you'll have to move to a different state that does hire the civilian crime scene processors. So what are we doing in the scene? The major stuff is observing, documenting, collecting, and I would put a fourth one on here, preservation, preserving it, so that you can analyze it later. So those are the 3 or 4 major activities of what you're doing. You're not analyzing at the crime scene. You're observing it. You're identifying what is evidence, what is not evidence. You're documenting it, and there's a variety of ways to do that. And then ultimately, you will collect it. That's one of the final activities that you do in a crime scene is collection. So the other part of this work is the laboratory work. And maybe some of you are more interested in that, which you certainly, it's a huge field and there's lots of jobs in the laboratory. Forensics in the lab, it's scientists and it's experts that have specializations. These people are very technical. They have vast education, vast experience. That means a lot of education, a lot of experience, because number 4, they are considered experts in their field, and they are allowed to give their expert opinions in a court of law. And that's a really big deal. Opinions in general are not allowed in trials. But, as a matter of evidence, your opinion about something is not enough. Who are we? We all have opinions. But in the case of these experts, and to be an expert, as this already said, you have to have a lot of education and a lot of experience in that particular field in order to be qualified as an expert, and that happens by the judge. Those people are allowed to give their opinions, so that's kind of a big thing. And just if you are more interested in doing the laboratory work, you don't need criminal justice. You need biology, you need chemistry, you need those physical sciences. That's what you would take at college, okay? Not criminal justice. So very important, and you can be sure that there will be quiz questions on the answer to this. The father of forensics. And actually, forensics has been around for a really long time. We have a lot of modern technology And we've changed a lot of the way that we do things because the capability of what we can do is so much greater now than it ever has been. But forensics has been around for a long time. And so the father of forensics is Edmund Locard. Edmund Locard. He is known as the father of forensics. He was French. He was born in France in 1877, and he died in 1966. So, quiz question, who is the father of forensics? Edmund Locard. And if you say it kind of like with a French accent, you'll probably remember it better. Locard. Okay. And so, and you have the ear here. You don't have to copy all this down, but I'm going to read it and I want you to listen and think about it. And I'll talk about it for a second afterwards. This is really interesting stuff. This is what Edmund Locard said. He said, every contact leaves its trace. Wherever he steps, whatever he touches, whatever he leaves, even unconsciously, will serve as silent witness against him. Not only his fingerprints or his footprints, but his hair, the fibers from his clothes, the glass he breaks, the tool mark he leaves, the paint he scratches, the blood or semen he deposits or collects. All these and more bear mute witness against him. This is evidence that does not forget. It is not confused by the excitement of the moment. It is not absent because human witnesses are. It is factual evidence. Physical evidence cannot be wrong. It cannot perjure itself. It cannot be wholly absent. Only its interpretation can err. Only human failure to find it, study it, and understand it can diminish its value. So, like, wow. And basically he's saying, Dr. Locard is saying, you know, human beings are the ones who are wrong and fallible. It is our failing to find this evidence, to understand it, to analyze it properly. It's there, but its significance is up to us to determine, and we're the ones that can get it wrong. When he says it is not confused by the excitement of the moment, well, that is a criticism of eyewitnesses, right? You know, if you see something that's really upsetting or tragic or, you know, terrifying, your emotions can cloud your judgment, your memory, what you think you saw. You know, we have that tunnel vision thing. There's a lot of stuff that happens to people, you know, when they're in their that flight or fight mode, and that adrenaline kicks up. And so Edmund Locard is saying, well, physical evidence doesn't have to worry about that. We don't have to worry about it getting up on the witness stand and, you know, testifying in a bad way. So this is really, really cool stuff. And he, you know, when you think about that, he said this such a long, long time ago. You know, they understood this 100 years ago. That's pretty cool. And so Edmund Locard came up with what is known as the theory of transfer. Theory of transfer, or you might also hear it or see it as Locard's exchange principle. And the theory of transfer states that the suspect always takes something with him and or leaves something behind. We're not talking about intentionally, physically taking something, you know, in your hand. We're saying being in the crime scene and then leaving it, you will take something of it with you away, and you will leave something of yourself behind. And so, in other words, when two surfaces touch, each leaves something of itself on the other. And so Locard is saying it's there. You just have to find it. Okay? And is that absolutely necessarily always 100% true? Maybe not, but you should have this in your mind. It's there. I just have to find it. You can't just go into a crime scene and like, oh, I don't see anything, so I guess there's nothing to find. You have to know it's going to be there, but you have to try harder, look closer, use tools, use technology to find things that might not be visible to the naked eye. And so just keep Edmund Locard, the father of forensics, in your mind, who said, when two things touch, each leaves something of itself on the other. And so your feet walking, you have to walk, right? We don't fly yet. We don't have the ability to fly. So the suspect didn't fly or hover into the crime scene, right? They walked into the crime scene. That means they were, there's shoes, or even if it was bare feet, you can leave stuff of yourself in that crime scene and take stuff, on the bottom of your shoes, on the bottom of your feet. Perhaps a hair fell off into the scene, or you took a hair from the crime scene and now it's on your clothing. I mean, these are just some examples, but that's what we mean. Two things touch, each take something of the other away. Theory of transfer, also a quiz question, also really important. All right. So some modern day forensic experts, and the very first one I've got up here, Dr. Henry Lee. He is, I just can't even describe to you how huge he is in our field. As far as forensics, as far as crime scene processing, he is brilliant. And he's actually retired now, unfortunately. But he has worked on just about every most famous case you can ever think of. He is absolutely brilliant, and much of what we know and do today is because of Dr. Henry Lee. He's amazing. He's like one of my heroes. So you can look him up. I mean, if you just Google him, you'll like read what his background is, what his education experience is unbelievable. He's done so much in the field of forensics. And so there's Dr. Henry Lee and Dr. Michael Baden. Now he's retired also, and I just put that picture in there of me because I actually got to meet him. He also has worked on a lot of very famous cases, but he started out as the chief medical examiner in New York City for many, many years. And I don't know if he was over the state of New York at one time also. I'd have to recheck his resume, but you can Google his name and also get a whole bunch of information. But he's brilliant, and I'm just looking here because I might have brought it back to school, but I have I did. I have a DVD. He used to have an HBO show where he discussed some homicide, pretty famous whodunit kind of cases that he worked on as a medical examiner. And they put he had a show on HBO where they went through some of those cases. It was really interesting. So I have that DVD and I can show you some of the cases in class, but he's another famous modern day forensics guy. And then I just threw in here Dr. Bill Bass. He wrote a book on anthropology, that's bones, the study of bones. Forensic anthropology is the study of bones as it relates to crime and crime scenes. And he's another brilliant guy. And he wrote a book that was so interesting. I think it's on my shelf at school. Dead Men Do Tell Tales. And it's also he's also worked on some pretty famous cases. So I just want to kind of give you these names. So, definition of a crime scene. It is a physical location where a crime occurred, where evidence was brought and taken from the scene, right? Edmund Locard's theory of transfer. And where something was altered or disturbed in some manner. Continuing on, also where potential evidence has been carried away and it is a starting point for an investigation. And pay attention to the pictures, guys. I try to make it interesting, but also relevant to the notes, so the pictures might help you remember some of the content. So there are 3 crime scene locations: inside, and there's a couple of indoor crime scenes. And of course, if you were in class, we were in class together doing this and talking about this, I wouldn't just give it to you right away. I'd ask you, what do you think they are, the 3 crime scene locations? And actually, you can kind of think, obviously, if you know that the first one is inside, I bet you can figure out the second one really easy, which is outside, right? An outdoor crime scene. But what do you think the third one is? And we're going to talk about, who cares, inside, outside, and then the third one. Well, because each has its own challenges. Each has its own inside, an indoor crime scene versus an outdoor crime scene. There's different things that you're going to have to be aware of and look for. So our third location is automobile. So inside, outside, automobile. Those are the 3 crime scene locations. And of course, I think I already said there will be a quiz question on this as well. And again, there's unique situations with automobiles. So, you know what? I thought I'll just go ahead and tell you now. Because I thought there's not really notes on this. This is just part of conversation here. An indoor crime scene, well, obviously you're talking about somebody's home or somebody's business. And what does that mean? Well, there's probably been a lot of people legitimately in that house, in that room, in that business, what have you. They're not the killer. They're not the suspect. They're not the criminal. Yet you might find their hair, fingerprints, who knows, and any other, bodily fluids, whatever. Doesn't mean they did it. So you have to be aware of that. And you could get overwhelmed with physical evidence from other people that have been there legitimately. And it doesn't mean anything, so that's tricky with an indoor crime scene. And, also somebody who had a legitimate reason to be there could also be the criminal. We'll just say the killer if it's a homicide. So, obviously they're going to have an alibi, oh yeah, you found my fingerprints because, I live there, or you found my fingerprints because it's my friend and I went to visit him. So, that doesn't mean I did it. So that's what's hard about indoor crime scenes. And then outdoor crime scenes, the elements, basically. You've got wind, you've got sun, heat, you have cold, and rain and snow, and all of that, right, can just destroy your physical evidence real quick, or get rid of it real quick. And the other thing is, how easy is it to secure it, and how much time has gone by since the crime occurred to when the police are able to secure it and process it. If you're talking about a few days, well, how many people and animals have possibly gone through there and intentionally, unintentionally carried evidence away? So that's a really big problem. Outdoor crime scenes, relying on that evidence to still be there and be in a good condition to be valuable. And then in an automobile, it's kind of like with a car, how many people have been in that vehicle legitimately? You gave your friend a ride, your family members, who's been in that car that may have left physical evidence behind. That is not the suspect. So that's tricky in the same way that indoor crime scene is. But the other thing is automobiles move, right? So going from one location, it's not necessarily a fixed location, because that car or truck could have gone to a lot of different areas before you were able to process it. And that could modify evidence that you find. Okay, so definition of physical evidence. Any material, however microscopic, solid, liquid, or gas, that may aid in the determination of the truth during the investigation of a crime. That is the definition of physical evidence. Physical evidence is obtained from three main sources. So I gave you the first one right here, the crime scene. What do you think the other two are going to be? And yes, this is another quiz question. Three main sources, not locations, sources of physical evidence. The crime scene, the victim, and dun, 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 the suspect. And his or her environment, right? Because if he's got something on his clothes and then he goes home and changes his clothes, couldn't there be things on the clothes that then drop off into his environment? Sure. Again, it's like looking for a needle in a haystack, but Edmund Locard, it's there. You just got to find it. So, three sources of physical evidence. What is the value of physical evidence? It proves that a crime has or has not been committed. It can place the suspect with the victim or with the crime scene. It can establish the identity of a person associated with a crime. And this last bullet here is really important. It also exonerates the innocent. That's just as important as finding the bad guy, right? Making sure that the innocent people don't get, in trouble and wrapped up in the criminal justice system. It can also corroborate the victim or witness's testimony. Suspects confronted with physical evidence may make confessions or admissions. It's more reliable than eyewitness testimony. It never changes. Absence of physical evidence may provide useful information. It assists in the development of modus operandi, or MO. Modus operandi, that's Latin. The English translation would be method of operation, and that is, how did they do what they did? Not motive. Don't get it confused with motive. A lot of people do get an intermix there, but method of operation. How did they do what they did? So, somebody who is really good and plans something out, they may not leave a lot of physical evidence. That tells you something about who they are. I think I talked to you a little bit about Gary Evans and his MO. I think I told you this. He liked to burglarize antique shops, and he would go into the store pretending to be a customer, just to look to see what they had that he wanted to steal. But he was also looking at the layout of the store, where are the doors, where are the windows, how much security do they have, all this stuff. This is all like intelligence. He would do that. That's MO, method of operation. And so when he would go in, he knew exactly where he was going, what he was looking for, how he was going to get in, how he was going to get out. And one of the things that he would do, I think I told you guys this, is that he learned pretty early on that a lot of people do not lock their second story windows. So in the summer, right, you got your windows open, and then maybe, you close the window because it's going to rain or whatever, and the window's closed. But Gary found out often people don't lock it. So he would climb up the side of a building and get in through an upstairs window. He was just banking out, and sure enough, he'd get up there and he'd just push that window right up, and it would open up for him, and that's how he would get in. That is MO, method of operation, how he did it. So again, that tells you a lot. If you were the investigator, that tells you a lot of who you're looking for. Golden rule of crime scenes: do not move or touch anything unless absolutely necessary. And we only have 3 times that it's going, or 3 scenarios that it's absolutely necessary. Here's another quiz question in case you hadn't figured that out. What is the golden rule of crime scenes? Do not move or touch anything unless absolutely necessary. I got it in red and bold. It's important. So, reasons that physical evidence may be moved. It's in danger of being destroyed. Water, wind, fire, sun, etc. It's not going to be any good to you if it gets destroyed. So if you got to move it, otherwise it's going to get destroyed, then you can move it. It is dangerous to those working in the scene. So, for example, electrical wires, glass, etc. If it's not safe for the worker, you can't stay there, and you may have to move evidence before you're really ready to move it, but you have to because of safety reasons. And the third and most common time that it is okay to move your physical evidence is because you're at the end of everything that you were needing to do. And what is that? You have recorded that evidence, you have marked it, you have photographed it, you have measured it and sketched it. And you guys are going to learn how to do all that stuff in our unit. And so the final thing is to collect it. And we call that bagging and tagging. Okay. But that's the final step. And you want to make sure you got those pictures and you've recorded it and marked it and photographed it and sketched it, because once you move it, how can you ever know or prove exactly where it was before you moved it? And you're going to need to know that, where exactly it was. And so if you haven't measured it and sketched it and photographed it, you can never prove where exactly it was. So that's really important. And then we have major categories of evidence. There's 9 of them, 9 major categories of evidence. And the first one is weapons. So each category of evidence is analyzed differently, depending on what it is. And what you can get off of it is going to be different depending on what it is. So weapons, obviously guns, bullets, ballistics. Then you have knives and edged weapons. That's, a little different. Could you get fingerprints off of either one? Yup. Could there be blood or bodily fluids on either one? Yup. Obviously ballistics and bullets, you're not going to get off of an edged weapon. But when we, like you can use anything as a weapon, right? A baseball bat could be a weapon depending on how it's used. So sometimes evidence falls into more than one category, right? It could be a weapon and something else, like a baseball bat. Okay. Our second category is called bodily fluids. That is the category. And blood, semen, and saliva go in that category. So if I ask you a quiz question that says, name a category of evidence, do not tell me blood. Blood is not the category. Bodily fluids is the category. Okay. And then those 3 are what go in that category. So think of it as an umbrella category, overarching group. Blood, semen, saliva, and I'm sure you guys know DNA is the big value. DNA. Blood, we will talk about blood typing, A, O, right, A, B, B. Blood type is still helpful, useful, right? Because you know that if you have your suspect is a type A, well, that eliminates anybody who's not type A blood. But there's a whole lot of people who are. So it can narrow down your pool of people that you're looking for. But DNA specifically points to one individual and one individual only. Far more valuable and important. And obviously semen and saliva will give you DNA as well. Then we have our category of latent impressions, and that's actually what you guys are going to physically start doing and working on right away this week is latent impressions, how to develop them and process them and collect them. And palm prints is part of that as well. And you know what? Foot, toe prints. That's a thing. But they all go under latent impressions. The word latent actually means hidden. It's hidden, and you have to do something to make it visible. That's what latent means for latent impression. So the fingerprints are there, but you can't really see them. We can't see them too good, and you have to do something to process them to make them visible. That's our third category, latent impression. So again, don't tell me fingerprints on a quiz. Fingerprints is not the category. Latent impressions is the category. Shoe and tire impressions. Again, this is really valuable evidence, but how you would process it and collect it is very different than the others that we've talked about so far. Shoe and tire impressions. And then we have tool marks. Believe it or not, every single tool is unique. And when you use it in a crime scene, there's a very good chance you're leaving marks behind that are unique to that tool. Any tool that's been used is going to have characteristics that no other tool is going to have because of the way that it was used. And I really like this picture here because it's a really magnified picture of, we call those what look like scratch marks, are scratch marks, but they're called striations. And under a very high-powered microscope, an expert, not me, not you, but an expert in tool marks, and those people are out there, you could become one with enough experience, enough education, they can testify in court that their expert opinion is that this particular tool is the only one that could have made these tool marks at the crime scene. And that is because under analysis and usually the high-powered microscope, they can line up those unique features, characteristics. So, you know, that no other tool is going to match up with like that. Of course, the trick is finding the tool that made those marks. That's the trick. So you have to develop a suspect, and then you have to hopefully search, you know, get a search warrant if needed, and search and look for that tool. And hopefully you find it, but then you have to send it to the lab and they'll do their analysis. Question documents, you know, bank statements and medical bills and diaries and, you know, all of those things are good evidence and provide a lot of information about a lot of things. So that's a category of evidence. Soil. And, you know, this is just some different types of soil that are out there. And, you know, like, well, who cares? Well, it narrows down a geographic location because depending on where you live in the country, depending on where you live in the county, your soil is going to be different than other areas. It doesn't identify a specific individual, right? Because probably your neighbor has the same soil as you, the people that live right next door probably have the same kind of soil, but it does narrow down where you're looking. So soil is a category. Glass is a category. Again, analysis in a lab, in a laboratory with people who know what they're looking at, know what to do. They can determine a lot from glass. What kind is it? Who manufactured it? What would it have been used in? That kind of thing. Miscellaneous trace. So that's a category. That's our 9th category. And you see that hair, fibers, paint chips are in that category. Miscellaneous trace. Trace means like really small and fine little bits of things. Miscellaneous trace. So don't tell me hair is a category for physical evidence. It's not. It's in the category of miscellaneous trace. And again, this is very valuable evidence. And as a police officer in the field working that crime scene, I can see that it's a paint chip and I can collect it. But I'm not the scientist who's going to analyze it. I have no idea just from looking at it. Oh, it's this kind of paint that came off of a 1975 Chevy, whatever. Like that's what the experts do in the laboratory, not the officers in the field. We don't know just by looking at something with your naked eye what it is. Those fibers, I mean, I can see what color they are, but I have no idea if are they carpet fibers, are they clothing fibers, are they made of cotton, are they made of synthetic material? Who knows? The laboratory will know. So classification of evidence, all physical evidence, so all the stuff that we just looked at, it falls into one of two classifications. Either identification characteristics, and I talked about this a little bit already, evidence which can positively be identified with one individual or source to the exclusion of all other sources. And so the two little pictures there are a fingerprint, latent impression, and DNA. Nobody else has your fingerprints. Nobody else has your DNA. Even a twin. Twins actually, identical twins usually do not have the same DNA. Even that you can tell, but there is a chance. There is a chance. I don't know what the percentage is, but there is a chance that an identical twin would have the exact same DNA as his twin. However, they still will not have the same fingerprints. So in that way, fingerprints are actually more reliable than actually DNA. And that's crazy, right? But anyway, but these two are very, I mean, it's not likely that an identical twin commits a horrible crime and then their twin gets arrested for it, and they have the exact same DNA. But I guess it's possible. So that is identification characteristics. And then we have class characteristics. So that is evidence that has the possibility of more than one source of the question material. And so, like I have the soil picture there and the fibers, right? I already gave you the example of you and your neighbor. It's narrowing it down, but it doesn't necessarily point to one specific individual. And the fibers, it makes me think about your criminal justice hoodies, right? We all have them. We all bought hoodies, most of us. And the manufacturer made that, bunch at the same time. So the fibers from those hoodies are probably going to be identical, right, to each other. So that's an example of class characteristics. And then the note here at the bottom, it says some evidence may fall into both classifications of evidence. I don't know if we're going to talk about hair here, but that would be one that could fall into both. Oh, note, under no circumstances should an apprehended suspect be immediately returned to the crime scene. Why do you think that is? I should probably just tell you. Because, and why would you do that anyway? Well, because sometimes your witnesses or victims can identify the suspect, and you may want them to identify somebody that you just picked up. And this is if it all happened like really in a short time period, like in the last 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But you need to bring the witness, put the witness or the victim in the patrol car and drive them past the suspect, wherever the suspect is. I'm assuming on the street. You don't take the suspect back to the store or back to where the crime scene to have the witness identify yes or no, is that the guy? And the reason is, because you're giving him his excuse as to why his hair, his fingerprints, his DNA are in the crime scene. Well, you took me there. That's why. So that's why we don't do that. I just want to go back really quickly, and you'll learn more about this when we get into the hair. We're going to talk about hair a lot more. But hair actually only has DNA in the bulb, the root, the part that's stuck in your head. That is the only part of the hair that has DNA. The rest of it, the shaft, is just class evidence. You know, lots of people have brown hair. Lots of people have straight hair. Lots of people have straight brown hair. So hair goes into the class, and it could go into the identification characteristics if you got the bulb and you can get the DNA. So that is one example of evidence that falls into both. Okay. So I actually talked about this a lot already. I won't say too much more about it. Modus operandi, Latin for method of operation. It is the how a criminal commits his crime, not the why. Learning how the criminal committed the crime will tell you a lot about who you should be looking for. So then we have two crime scene classifications. We have an organized crime scene. What is an organized crime scene? It's methodical. They leave little physical evidence behind. They knew what they were doing. They planned it out. It appears to be well thought out. The suspect is comfortable with the scene and his or her surroundings. Tells you a lot. There's a picture. There's a picture of an organized crime scene. Where's the crime? And the point is, you just from looking at it like this, you have no idea that a crime has been committed because nothing is out of place. Nothing is odd. Nothing is strange. And this is why, people who go on vacation and get burglarized while they're gone, if it's like somebody who knew them, had been in the house before, if they planned it out, those people could come back and have no idea until often weeks later, like something's missing and it's like, oh my God, I think somebody stole this, but they don't realize it right away because everything looks normal. That's an organized crime scene. Then you have a disorganized crime scene. What is that? It's opportunistic. It's very sloppy. They leave the scene in disarray, which means a mess. They leave lots of physical evidence behind. They didn't plan well or at all. And that's what we mean about opportunistic. It was just spur of the moment. You saw an opportunity, you took it. You had no plans of doing that ahead of time, but there it was. And the suspect is not comfortable with the scene or his or her surroundings. So that's a disorganized crime scene. And obviously that tells you a lot about who you're looking for as well. So in this crime scene, it's a mess. It's in disarray. There's lots of physical evidence. There's obviously blood and a shoe and boxes and stuff all over the place. Could some of that have been there before? Yeah, but you don't know by looking at it which part of this is crime scene and which part of it was already like that. But this is just a good picture to show you a disorganized crime scene. And that is the end of week 11 notes and lecture. I know it was long. I know it was a lot. Please write down the questions, any questions that you have, and ask me as we go. Okay? And send me pictures of your notes so I can give you credit. All right, guys. Bye.